President Trump and America doesn't believe and doesn't afraid of your this blackmailing. That's finished. That's positive issue. That's why just in Kremlin they quite nervous about that. That important instrument of their pressure on the West disappeared.
In its first response since President Trump announced he had moved 2 American submarines to strategic locations near Russia, the Kremlin has shrugged off the threat, insisting that the vessels were already on combat duty. Meanwhile, Russia's security services say the UK is enlisting NATO allies to participate in a major act of sabotage against Russian oil tankers. Let's speak to Mikhail Kasyanov, Prime Minister under Vladimir Putin between the year 2000 and 2004. Mikhail, good afternoon. Welcome to the programme.
Good afternoon.
Very good to speak to you. I want to just consider both of these things first of all. So the movement of submarines by Trump and this reporting emerging based on Russia's security services about the UK working with NATO to try to sabotage Russian oil tankers. The first one is perhaps more believable and factual than the second. However, there is a feeling of perhaps pressure building on Russia. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think just that's correct. The understanding of President Trump is maturing, and he getting more and more just close to the position to understand that Putin is not the person to negotiate. Just the only language Putin understands their strength. That Mr. Putin for 4 years prior to Mr. Trump's inauguration just pursued the policy of blackmailing America and President Biden. And in fact was a fruit of this blackmailing, and he already recognized that the main achievement of his term was just prevent the nuclear war. Putin knew that, and that's what he understood, and take the blackmailing just for European and American leaders. Now President Trump, by this response of positioning just 2 submarines on the strategic positions, demonstrated that you, Putin, no more have this instrument of blackmailing. Me, President Trump, and America doesn't believe and doesn't afraid of your this blackmailing. That's finished. That's positive issue. That's why just in Kremlin they quite nervous about that. That important instrument of their pressure on the West disappeared.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider as well, Mikhail, this idea of a false flag attack perhaps on Russian ships and what that actually means. Is this a potential build-up from Russia to, I suppose, create space or allowance in its view for it to attack someone else?
Yeah, talking about just this the shadow fleet, of course, it's an important issue for the whole the whole West. If you impose the sanctions, you should control the sanctions to be implemented. That's what Americans and British authorities and other European authorities tried to implement. Not quite successfully, but now there is a new wave of this, especially in the Baltics and those straits on Germany and Denmark and near Britain. Of course, Putin understands that could be a real pressure of reducing his, I would say, foreign exchange inflow to Russia, his revenue out of sale of oil. That is important and sensitive point for him. That's why the EU already adopted just a new regulation, just new price cap as 47, 45, etc., instead of 60. But it doesn't work. It will not work without America. That's why the important point right now, just if the West would like to considerably reduce Putin's revenue getting out of sale of oil, there should be combined efforts to control this, to control the oil price for Russia's oil.
And notably, President Trump has posted, just in the last few minutes actually, India is not only buying massive amounts of Russian oil, they are then, for much of the oil purchased, selling it on the open market for big profits. They don't care how many people in Ukraine are being killed by the Russian war machine. Because of this, I will substantially be raising the tariff paid by India to the USA. Thank you for your attention to this matter, with 3 exclamation marks from President Trump. So he in turn is now pressuring the allies of or allies is not quite the right word necessarily, is it? But those who are perhaps supporting Russia in that sort of context, as India might be perceived to be doing, in order that the pressure is maximised.
Yes, that's correct. That India benefited for these 3 years, benefited of purchasing Russian oil on a low price. And correct, just even their factories reproducing, just producing the gasoline and other things, just selling on the international market. That's correct. And that's India and the whole West, just Europe, Great Britain, the US, closed their eyes for those 3 years. That India, a friendly country for everyone. And that's why let them just make money on that.
Yeah.
And before, India never bought oil from Russia. India is nearby to the Middle East, and that's why it was absolutely correct. That's a spot market. That's an international market, and that this will be very easy for them to switch back for their usual methods, usual models of getting just oil and gas. That's why they now continue to benefit until the time President Trump would impose real sanctions against them.
I want to ask you as well, Mikhail, about the visit of Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. He is due to arrive into Moscow on Wednesday. I wonder what that trip really is all about. And I think more than that, I want to ask you, Mikhail, who would be the most influential people that Witkoff could meet during this visit that perhaps would be able to have a word with Putin to convince him of the need for peace? Who can Witkoff speak to that will change the direction of this war?
Mr. Putin himself, that's the only person just for that. All other, there's some kind of preparation. But in fact, I don't think just Mr. Witkoff will be capable to ensure Putin to stop the war and to sit down to negotiate. Right now, Putin continues to believe that he is winning the war of attrition. He's conducting against Ukraine, and he will make a lecture to Mr. Witkoff about just historical development that Ukraine, it was not a nation, just there was no such country as Ukraine, it was big Russia, etc., etc. All this blah blah he already used many times in Russia and outside. He will continue trying to ensure American friends so that they would realize the reality and would take his position or get his understanding, his reasons as a serious, not just as a destroyment of the infrastructure of European security, but something new. He wants to negotiate with the US president a new architecture of security, European security, and maybe world security. He wants to decide just the fate of the world, but not just the conflict problem, which he believes is not a conflict, that is usual Russia's, Putin's operation just to establish their influence.
It's fascinating speaking to you, Mikhail. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's Mikhail Kasyanov, Prime Minister under Vladimir Putin between the years 2000 and 2004. We'll keep an eye, of course, on Steve Witkoff's arrival into Moscow on Wednesday. The Kremlin has said that contacts with him are useful and important. But Mikhail's saying there the only person that he can speak to that can convince Putin is Putin himself. Scott gets in touch to say, hello, Kyle, I'm on false flag. A terrifying thought after I recently listened to the War Game podcast. Putin's barking mad, but Trump is his conduit with no intention of standing up to the Kremlin. Of course, we're keeping a watchful eye on what the deadline passing. So the deadline is the 8th, that's Friday. This is the deadline that Trump has imposed for a ceasefire, or he will increase sanctions. In some ways, is he already increasing sanctions if he's threatening an increased tariff on India because of their involvement with Russian oil? On that note, Dale says India not only buy and market oil from Russia, the UK has just celebrated a widely open trade agreement with India. Where is Labour's joined-up thinking for Ukraine?